Hello, and welcome to another episode of Hacking with Friends. Today I have my friend Alex on.
Hello.
And we are going to be talking about Wi-Fi surveillance. But in this case, we are going to be doing it from the air. Now, how expensive is it to start an aerial surveillance program, do you think? That includes 4K video and the ability to do signals intelligence to detect particular Wi-Fi devices. Alex, how much would you say? $100,000, a couple $1 million to get started?
I would say a good couple $100.
Yeah. So clearly this would be a pretty expensive capability if you wanted to search, 100 acres within 3 minutes for a Wi-Fi device. But fortunately, Alex and I, over the weekend, went and did exactly that. We searched an area that was about 100 acres for 2 Wi-Fi devices, and we were able to pinpoint their location for, I think this probably ended up costing under $100. Probably more all told $60 or so.
Oh, yeah, not including the drone. So
This is
hardware,
true.
I think, no, reasonably, honestly, $30.
So do you want to show
less.
off what the setup is? So obviously you'll need some sort of drone for this. I'm not really counting the cost of the drone because you can mount this on basically any drone. This is a DJI Mini 2 with a bunch of tape on it. And this is something that I got for free from the company that I work for in order to do stuff like this. So we went ahead and strapped, again, maybe $30, $40 worth of electronics to this. And Alex can show you exactly what it looks like all put together.
That's honestly also a vast overestimation now looking at the hardware I have in my hands. So the main board setup we have here is a bunch of D1 Mini hats stacked together. So if you're not familiar with the D1 Mini, it's basically a form factor for the ESP8266 that looks like this. Mm-hmm. And it comes with hardware modules that you can just stack on top called hats, which is short for hardware attached on top. So here you can see we have this LiPo battery hat, which allows it to be powered by a LiPo. We have a micro SD logger, so we can store data to a micro SD card. And the main board we're using is just this ESP8266 that's sort of wedged in between. So altogether, this is maybe I'd say $15 or so if you source the parts raw from AliExpress.
Yeah. So I was kind of going off of Amazon prices. So I pulled up a couple pages to show exactly what these hardware components are we're using. So just taking a look really quickly, if you want to follow along with this project, first you'll need a D1 Mini. There's 3 of them in this kit for $11.99. So obviously this is not very expensive. So we're let's say $10 or so. Then let's say we need a GPS. This is $8. Okay, so let's say $20. Now we need a micro SD card logger. You can see our buying options are going to be, let's see, buying options. Okay, so we have $8.60. So let's just make it another 10. And then here we have another, let's see, LiPo battery.
Yeah, LiPo battery.
$8.99. And then finally the actual battery itself, so 7. So that's really not that much money. Even getting it on Amazon where things are really, really inflated, it's $10 per component.
Yeah.
And there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 components. So $50 on Amazon. And again, more $15 on AliExpress if you're willing to wait for a month or so. Mm-hmm. So these components, the idea here is you can use these. I didn't know that hat stood for
hardware attached on top?
Yeah, I didn't know that. The one thing about these that's cool is that the pinouts are compatible with the D1 Mini, so typically you can just attach one of these and you're good to go. If you use the Raspberry Pi, you're probably familiar with these because it's a really popular way of taking a base board like this D1 Mini and then through just dropping something on top of it and soldering it in place, having the ability to add sensors or other different peripherals in a really accessible and predictable way. Now, we basically took advantage of having multiple hats left over and just soldering them together to create a signals intelligence platform. And what we're really doing is Wardriving. So Alex, do you want to explain what Wardriving is?
Yeah, so Wardriving is basically a process where you conflate both Wi-Fi scanning and GPS mapping. So basically what you do is you can drive around or something like that, gather Wi-Fi information from specific locations you drive past, and basically just dump that information on top of a map so you can pinpoint what networks or devices you spotted in a certain area.
Exactly. So in this case, we're going to be using the wireless sensor of the D1 Mini, and we are going to be using the GPS sensor to provide the GPS coordinates. So as we go, we're going to be recording to a CSV file, and we're going to be recording lots of different information about, the altitude, the latitude, the longitude, and then we're also going to be recording information from the D1 Mini, such as any different networks that it can see broadcasting packets and the signal strength, hopefully, that it receives it at. Now, this gives rise to something called, if we want to anyway, it gives rise to something called trilateralization. Alex?
Basically using 3 or more GPS points or points that have certain information to determine where another thing is located based off signal strength. So if we have like 3 points we were at in which we detected the signal strength of a single device, we can use like fancy angle measurements and stuff like that corresponding with the like signal strength in order to pinpoint like where the device is like actually located.
Exactly. So in this case, if we were like either driving in a car or maybe flying, for example, and we received, I don't know, your cell phone signal. It was putting out signals and we were able to detect it in 3 different locations. Depending on the different signal strength, we would be able to use basic triangulation and then some other different factors to try to figure out the most probable area that your phone would be in. And eventually we would be able to condense this heat map down into a single point. And that would give us a pretty good indication of where you actually are. Now, of course, we can also just, with this drone fly around and just attempt to get just a raw hit and see like where we're getting detections. But if we're able to work with a more powerful antenna so that we're able to actually receive more signals, then we would be able to use these additional data points to kind of focus in how precise we are about geolocation. So let's give this example. Let's say that we want to track down the source of a Wi-Fi signal. Let's say we want to track down a specific individual using a Wi-Fi device. This could also equally be applied to Bluetooth. So if we wanted to track someone from their Bluetooth headphones or the stereo of their car, then we could also probably retrofit this to instead use like an ESP32 and scan for Bluetooth. So there's other ways that you could use the same sort of platform to specifically go after wireless devices and start tracking their location and finding out where they are. Currently, these 2 different payloads are also separated. So we have the drone as one payload, and then we have this as a separate payload. And this was kind of intentional because while it would be really cool to tie it into the drone, maybe power it from the drone, or make it otherwise available to see in real time, this is really easy to just put on anything you might have that can fly. So it's really light. I think I measured it at about an ounce, not including the battery. So you could get a smaller battery and end up getting a much lighter weight than the kind of like honking battery we ended up using for this test. But really, like, I find that this is a really good way to get into slicing and dicing Wi-Fi data that's combined with location data for a relatively low budget. So you could, of course, throw this in your car too and use this as a Wardriving kit. But really, like, the cool thing here is the warflying. Like, that's what we're kind of focused on because of how quickly you can search an area. So our example area today is like 100 acres. And if you were walking around trying to identify someone on foot, we did this, and it took us about like probably 20 minutes or so to walk all the way around the perimeter of this area. Maybe like 15, 20 minutes or so. We executed this flight in 3 minutes, and then by going through and starting to use a Python program to modify, clean up, and then eventually analyze this data, we were able to pinpoint the exact location and then go back on video and make sure that everyone was where we were seeing they were. So this is really cool because we were able to apply this to all sorts of searching. And in this case, we're basically cheating at a Wi-Fi fox hunt by attaching the sensor to a drone, flying it around, and getting the answer very quickly. Yep. So Alex, do you want to explain like what we had to do in order to get this working? Because we actually were lacking 3 wires, which were supposed to connect the GPS to both data lines and then ground. So
so we only brought the hardware stack with us that contains like all of these D1 minis that are just soldered together, and we forgot to consider that the GPS needed to be attached somehow. So we didn't have any spare wire with us, and we ended up just salvaging like random wire from a USB cable that I had to cut up and strip with my teeth. And then, so you can see I just like very poorly like wrapped the wires around like the contact points in a park and tried to like tape it down with painter's tape.
Yeah, we
eventually got
tape,
back and soldered it together, but it was like a very janky rig we had.
Yeah,
put
so
together.
Alex like took this sacrificial USB cable, cut it open, then used his teeth to strip the wire, wrapped it carefully around each terminal, soldered it into place, which also our soldering iron didn't have the correct power supply. So the power supply that we had, like above certain temperatures could sometimes have issues, but Alex managed to get it working okay. Managed to solder it into place, insulate the wires so that they stop shorting each other, and then get this thing flying and durable enough that we've been like pulling on it, and like otherwise like this thing has been like pretty abused because there's a bunch of sensors on the bottom of this drone that cannot be obstructed in order for it to fly. For example, if it hangs over and it blocks the underneath sensor, the drone thinks that there's an object right underneath it and just starts flying straight up out of control. So lots of different quirks with this.
Not to mention, we ended up just like taping it to the bottom of this drone with painter's tape.
Yeah,
and
so
like a hairband.
we used a hair tie and blue painter's tape as the only way of securing this payload. I have to say it worked really well.
Yeah.
But in the future, Alex and I are thinking about creating a printed circuit board that would allow you to do this in a much more compact and controllable fashion. So if you guys like this idea, and instead of buying like 3 or 4 Raspberry Pi, 3 or 4 ESP8266 based hats, then you could also just get a PCB if we make one. So let us know if you want us to do it, and we'll make one available. Yeah, so this was quite the struggle to get this up and in the air, but the scenario that we set up is we had one of our friends go to the opposite end of the park and turn on a Wi-Fi hotspot. The reason we did this is because currently this is set up to scan for access points, although this should be able to, as you might have seen on one of Alex's video on Hack 5, it can also be turned into promiscuous mode, so it's just receiving any Wi-Fi packets, and in that case it would be able to identify both smartphones in the area as well that were just broadcasting looking for nearby networks or specific access points. So we get into a little bit of like MAC address randomization there, where if we wanted to then kick it up a notch, we could broadcast networks that we think maybe this device has connected to before if we're really looking for it. But that gets a little bit more advanced than we're doing for the specific scenario. So for now, we're keeping it really simple, and we're just making it a single device that's broadcasting something that we're interested in. In this case, we created the network called Target 3, and we're going to be flying around and trying to basically find out exactly where it is. Now, we also had a different network that was called, what was it called, Alex?
It's called Bingus Mobile. Not mobile, but Bingus Mobile.
Oh, Bingus Mobile. Okay, great. Yeah, so we also had Bingus Mobile, and we had kind of an interesting thing with this where we were able to basically have line up. Okay, well, no, I didn't want to switch over yet, but sure, we can switch over. Where basically we were able to get like line of sight, and I was able to see Bingus Mobile, or Bingus
Mobile.
Sorry, Bingus Mobile.
Excuse me.
I thought it was like a carrier. what service provider do you have?
That was
Bingus
unintentional,
Mobile.
but I guess Bingus Mobile makes more sense.
Okay, I was about to go through the code and look. It looks like it is Bingus Mobile. It's not Bingus Mobile.
I intended for it to mean Bingus Mobile.
Okay, well
I
it says
guess it's
Bingus
Bingus
Mobile,
Mobile.
so I'm gonna go with what's in the code. So
Alrighty.
Bingus Mobile was our second target, and what was interesting was we were able to identify Bingus Mobile in 2 different places, just because once this drone gets high enough, it actually has pretty good reception because it can kind of receive anything that's line of sight. So as soon as we were getting in the actual air, as soon as Alex turned on Bingus Mobile, it was able to see him in the parking lot. So we got his final location where he was hiding that we were looking for, and we also got him initially as he was turning it on, just because we didn't anticipate that this would get such good reception once it was up and in the air. So, okay, we put all this together, and then we went ahead and used Arduino IDE to flash over this program. So we used, who wrote this program, Alex?
Me.
That's right. Alex wrote this program.
Yeah.
So
You can find it on my GitHub.
Yes, you can.
I don't know where you can. Oh, alexlind/something. Or github.com/alexlind.
There you
go.
go.
I don't know what the repository name is, but try to find it.
Yeah. All right. Well, great. A challenge for you. So what's cool about this is if we have everything wired up correctly, which in the end we managed to get it all wired up correctly, and we'll make sure to put this version on GitHub, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Then we were able to go ahead and get this flashed onto the onto the microcontroller, but there was originally very little serial output, so we had no idea what was going on. So after a little bit of tweaking, we were able to check the SD card, go back and forth, and verify it was in fact recording. So we this is the code that we're using. If you just want to see, it's kind of elegant that it's only 206 lines and it doesn't have like any additional stuff. But
can be further shortened. This is the one I stole from Probe Hunter, which is another platform I made, and I basically just like excised the code that uses the screen, which you can see at the library Adafruit SSD 1306. So there's like a bunch more code that can be removed from this actually.
Nice. Yeah, and one thing I did note is we had some troubles getting this set up because, for one, somebody forgot to document that you need to install TinyGPS++.
Oh, whoops.
It just kind of pops up when you try to run it.
Usually people who like write their code just forget to like document it, and it really sucks.
So first I installed TinyGPS++, but then we got stuck because we couldn't figure out like why it wasn't using the correct time library. So we had to like install the correct time library. So 2 little hiccups here, but I think we'll end up providing like a compiled binary that you can just put on the D1 and provided that you're using the hats that we're using and you solder them on properly, then it should work just fine. Right. So one nice thing about the hats is like they tend to be pretty like pin compatible. So we'll try to create a list of the hardware that we actually used in this project so you can follow along if you want to and actually use this code, because we don't want you to be like mucking around through the code like yelling at it if this is your first time. But anyway, so all this stuff together, then we should be able to get some output from it that's saying that it is in fact recording, and when we check the SD card we should be able to see something that looks like this. So this is the data that we got from our flight, and you can see here all the different fields that we're recording. So we have the MAC address, the SSID, the auth mode, which is basically the security that the network is using, the first time that this network was seen, and also the channel that it was recorded on. So you can see here that if you wanted to slice and dice data with channel, for example, you could also look into that. The RSSI, what's the RSSI?
Received signal strength indication. So that's just like how strong the Wi-Fi signal is. And actually it's really weird because it's measured in negative values.
Oh wow, look, this must be really close. Yeah. It's got a 90% signal, right?
Right. Wait, no, it's the other, wait.
Yeah, that's what you were saying. It's opposite.
It's the other way around.
Yeah, so it's almost like the way that I describe it as a good way for beginners to explain it. It's like it's measuring signal loss almost. So like this is basically saying there's like 90% signal loss.
Yeah.
Whereas if you saw something that was the number was really really like technically like low,
the closer to like 0 it is, the stronger.
Exactly.
And usually like 60 is very strong.
Yeah. So here's like 75. So this was probably the strongest point at which we were able to see this. Oh no, never mind, 71. So you can see we're getting closer and closer, and basically this gives us the information. No, are we getting closer or are we getting further away? We can kind of play hot and cold. And if we wanted to, seeing as like, for example, we have multiple detections of this network. So if we wanted to slice and dice this data later to see like a heat map of the received signal strength to try to get a determination of where this thing was, we could probably do that. We actually didn't do that for this guide, but like now that I think of it, maybe we'll do that if you want to see how that would be done. So this is the raw data, again, that we're working with. We can also see the different types. So if we were working with Bluetooth, we could tag that here. The accuracy in meters, this is given to us by the GPS. So you can see it's pretty consistently...
I don't even know what that is, but I coded it in there. I forget how to use that, though.
The accuracy in meters?
Yeah, I forget what it's gauging. But
it's the relative accuracy. So basically the amount of error that it could be having.
Oh, I see.
I believe anyway. So like this basically lets you know like how far off the GPS could be or what the margin for error is.
Well, 160 is a heck of a lot.
It is. But it's better than 9999. That's when it started up. And
I have to fix that.
And then 420.
Nice.
Yeah. So as you can see, once the GPS gets set up, like it does its thing. But yeah, that is kind of a wide margin for error. So maybe we should look into that. But then again, like we were also doing this flight like pretty quickly before it had like much of a chance to set up. So we can see the maximum or the minimum rather was like in the 150 range. So yeah. So we can also see the altitude. So I was also able to do a little bit of digging around and see, like I can see when the drone ascended, when the drone descended. And if I wanted to, I could use these data points to draw like a flight path. And in fact, one of the services I'll show you today and actually does that, which is super cool. So then we have our, of course, latitude and longitude, which is what we need. So all this is the information we need to start looking into this and seeing what is out there. So I also didn't really know this, but there's actually data that is logged from the drone too. So this is the data that was logged on our drone flight. And I'm kind of impressed with this. We have, of course, the date time, latitude, longitude. So the date time is what really mattered here because I was able to find the point at which we started recording. So now we can sync the video file to the actual like records because we know exactly when we started filming and when we stopped filming. So we know basically when we want to pay attention to this recorder because this will start recording Wi-Fi networks from the second we start it up. So, you know, we have a good like 4 or 5 minutes on the ground of just getting this thing like taped up and configured and recording a little bit of it. So we want to be able to figure out exactly when we started, you know, recording or flying. And this gives us a ton of data. We can see the height based on the sonar sensor. So we can see exactly when we started rising, the speed that we were traveling, how many satellites we had to confirm our GPS coordinates, the maximum altitude, the maximum distance we were from the target, or rather where we launched from. And then we can see is photo or is video. So these two variables are basically for whether or not we are recording. Oh my gosh, you can see that there's even more.
There's a lot of data.
Yeah, so you can see the fly state as well. So you can see the motor started, auto takeoff. We can see GPS. You can also see any warnings that I got. So it'll like, if there was something in the flight path, it'll warn me. So we can see like, uh-oh, max altitude reached, like make sure to not go any higher. So, you know, it tells me all the details in order to reconstruct what happened on this flight. And unfortunately, this file is encrypted, but you are able to download it if you upload it to a service and then let them decrypt it and then download it for you, which is exactly what I did here. So this service was also free, at least for you know, non-commercial use. So I thought this was really cool to be able to extract so much information because like this has everything down to like the time in milliseconds. If you want to just like do it from the beginning and not have to convert it over. So yeah, this was so useful. So those are the two different data sources that we got from our flight where we had this thing take off, fly around. Again, we had two people in position that were like hiding basically with their smartphones. And my goal was to fly around and find them. So this was a very, very interesting project. And so I'm going to go over to downloads. Oh, wait, sorry. Movies. All right, so let's take a quick look at the flight recording. So this was the flight that we did. You can see we're trucking along, and I'm actually going to fast forward through the first part. So this was when we got our first unintentional detection. As soon as we got up here to this altitude, I was able to detect Alex booking it through the parking lot to his position. But by the time that I came around, he was already at the spot that he needed to be, like off over here. And once we flew around on this point, we were able to get, oh, you can see him in the corner right in the top right, under the bridge, making it to his position. So right here is about where we started detecting him, and you can see his position is hiding underneath this bridge. So we continued on our flight, and then we were able to get all the way across here to the skate park, where our second target was hiding. So we proceeded to fly over the skate park, and at that point, we were able to pass over, and you can see this is our target right here. So we're looking for them over by the skate park, and kind of above this athletic field was our 2 points of detection. And as I continued flying, the drone had all sorts of malfunctions right about here and got stuck and started hovering for no reason. And I thought I was going to lose it in this puddle underneath. But in the end, I was able to get it back. And you can see me. At this point, I'm throwing on a bunch of backpacks so I can go run after it. And then I got to settle down, and there I am right there, piloting the drone. Nice. So, okay, so this was our flight data. You can see exactly where our two people were. One of them was hiding on the bridge, and the other person was right over by the skate park / athletic field. So let's go ahead and go over and start taking a look at some of the stuff that we did. So the first thing I did was I compared all the time zone, the time code information. I compared how long the videos were, and I basically figured out that I needed 2 time codes to omit data if I only wanted to see the information from the flight and not from the setup and takedown. Because again, there was some time on the ground where the drone was plugged in, or the Wardriving kit was plugged in, and it's just recording the same networks over and over and over and over. So it's not really something we want to include. So I did just this little calculation just to determine exactly like how I would sync this. And in the end, I was able to look at a couple resources, one of them being Air Data UAV. So this was that service I mentioned that's really cool. It was free. I got to sign up for it, and it took this encrypted file that the DJI Mini produced, and it decoded it and was able to figure out all this information about the flight. So it's the takeoff battery, the landing battery, the max altitude, the distance, the max battery temperature, tips and warnings it received, and then it let me download the CSV file, which was perfect.
That's
all
the
the
best.
information I needed. I could also download a KML file if I wanted to see like a mapped file as well. But remember, this is just from the drone, and these two systems are not connected. So this is just going to tell me my flight path data, and you can see also like relatively like what happened here on the flight path. You can see us going around and covering this whole area. Now I also mapped this out to just get the volume of where we would have signal resolution, and it's almost exactly 100 acres. So again, we just did a whole flight path to try to identify where someone might be. This was a 3-minute flight. So really, really cool that this was so short. It says the flight airtime was 5 minutes, but it was actually like 3 in terms of actually circling around, because by the time we got over here, it hovered for quite some time before coming back to home. So made me very, very nervous. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at, where is it? Some visualizations. So first up, I am using Google Colab. What is Google Colab?
So Google Colab is an online interface for basically Jupyter notebooks that also gives you access to Google's like machine learning services. So the original intention they created this for was so you could like train and visualize like AI data online if you don't have like fancy access to a computer with GPUs and stuff like that for processing. But since it can also run Jupyter notebooks, we're using it in order to do like reconnaissance where we can like visualize maps and stuff like that.
Yeah. So this is really cool because it has all the benefits of Jupyter Notebooks with also being in the cloud, so you can share it easily with other people. There are some annoying quirks where like it'll wipe the data like after it shuts down, for example.
Yeah.
So for this code, I have to re-upload my data over and over. A little bit annoying, but I could also probably put it in Google Drive.
Yeah,
and
you
get
could
around
put it
that.
in Drive, I was going to say.
Yeah, so that way you can have some persistent storage. So, okay, so my code is really simple. So Alex like had already done a lot of this and offered me like a code sample, and I was just like, no. And I just spent a day drinking coffee and just writing Python code to like slice up this based on some code I'd written last year. And I really enjoyed it. So that's why I rejected, not because I didn't want the help,
Yeah.
just because I wanted to write it myself. And basically this is really easy to use. I like using pandas a lot because it reduces or it digest data into data frames, which are very predictable, easy for beginners to work with, and easy to plug into other things like mapping systems, which is why I use it so often, because you can take a variety of data sources and clean them up to be pretty identical. And that's where we get into data cleaning. So cleaning your data is really, really important. If you were to go ahead and take the original file, not the cleaned war flight data, in fact, maybe I'll subject us to that. Here, let's do that. So I'm going to go ahead and, oh wait, yeah, I'm going to upload. In this case, I'm going to upload.
Not the clean one. Where's...
It's just called, like, hold on.
I think it's just like log.
Yeah, it's like log
3
one
or something like that.
It's so unfortunate because I actually think it's on the desktop. Okay. All right. Well, we'll have to blur all that anyway, so I guess it doesn't matter. All right. So you'll just have to trust me when I say
That is
that
dirty.
Well, yeah. So the problem here is actually a single comma. So the comma was in a Wi-Fi network called router, comma, I hardly know her. And yeah. Michael's still laughing at that one. The comma actually messed up the code here because our good friend Alex forgot to...
I forgot to escape the strings when they printed like to the output file, but basically CSV files, comma separated value files, use commas as like a delimiter to separate like each variable type. So since this network name had a comma in it, that was like obviously problematic, and it thought it was like a whole new separated value.
Yeah, so if you wanted to protect your Wi-Fi network from this sort of surveillance, just make it nothing but commas.
Right.
And it'll create like 80 new values in Alex's surveillance tool.
Yeah.
And it won't be able to be parsed.
Or just like don't write bad code.
Also that. So in order to make this work, then we had to clean it up a little bit. So the first thing I did was deleted that network because it wasn't related to our study at all. It was just messing everything up. So rather than write a rule to bring it back into compliance, I just purged the bad data. And this is something that people like to do a lot.
Yeah.
So in this case, it wasn't one of our targets, so it had no impact on our study. If you were doing a study based on like volume, then obviously like discarding a bunch of things rather than fixing the data when it's fixable would be a bad idea. But it didn't really make sense for us to try to correct the data when it was only a single network that wasn't part of what our survey was. So I removed that data and then I went ahead and added it here, and that fixed it. So there weren't any other networks that thought they were going to be clever and include a comma. So because of that, we were able to use the capture. So just a little quirk, when you're using things like this, sometimes you'll try to load the data and it just won't work. And I just like kept thinking the code was broken. And then when I finally went into the data source, I could see exactly what was wrong. The whole column was pushed over because there was it just said router, comma. And I was like, what? Why is this its own cell? And then like in the thing that says encryption type, it said, I hardly know her. And I was like, how is that a type of encryption? And then the next cell over was like WPA3. I'm like,
it's
what?
denying its knowledge of encryption.
Yeah,
It hardly
exactly.
knows her.
Yeah, so that was just a very funny like just thing that happened. And again, part of this is just like having code that doesn't like look out for the sort of issue that can crop up, and part of it is cleaning your data, because invariably there's going to be some data that can mess stuff like this up. So just know, before you get into big data projects, data cleaning is a huge thing. And it can be the solution to your problem if you're not able to load the CSV file. So for me, I just imported pandas as PD, imported Folium for mapping. I imported matplotlib and pyplot. And then I also read in this Wardriving file, which is a CSV file. I indicated that the delimiter was the comma, encoding Latin 1, and then I set the header to 0. So what is the header?
That should be the CSV file header. It basically tells you like what values you're looking at and what it corresponds to. Can you actually open up the cleaned Warflight CSV files so we
Yes,
can look
I
at that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Here it
so is there any way to look at the raw CSV, like not formatted?
I don't want to.
Okay, but basically like in a regular raw CSV file, it just looks like regular text that's separated by commas. So you'll just see like Mac, comma, SSID, comma, auth mode, and then all of these other like values you see here are also going to be comma separated. But if you're using something to parse this data, you want to know what you're looking at. So the header is something that will indicate these different data types and what they correspond to. So you'll see like Mac corresponds to this column, SSID, so on and so forth.
Yeah. Wait, don't you have this file? The raw one?
It's on my Signal. I can't open it right now.
All right. Yeah, so if you are using, for example, a Wiggle Wi-Fi file, then it's very important to know what this means, because Wiggle uses a different kind of like header. It will basically be the second line instead of the first line. So in this case, we're saying, well, it's programming starts at 0. But if we were using Wiggle, we might need to say 1. And that way we ignore the first like diagnostic line that like includes all the information about the device type and the capture and whatever. And instead we're using the second one that's actually the headers. Right. So just an interesting note, because I thought this was not necessary and just ignored it. But it turns out this is very important depending on the way that your CSV file is formatted. So if the first line of your CSV file isn't the header, that's okay. You can adjust it with a single line here. Yep. So at this point, I just run this so it provides a sample. I'm going to break this off into a new line of code. And then I'm going to bring it up. And I just want to show off like what it looks like to just sample this. So if I'm going to read all this stuff in and then just do a sample, wd.sample. So wd is my data frame that I've read in. It's just wireless data is what I'm using. Right. And wd.sample just means show me a random sample of this data set to make sure that it read in properly. And then if I just provide 10, I'm like, I want to see 10 records. That's what I get. I get 10 random records from this data set. And we can see, okay, look at that. We can see a lot of information. We can see that the headers were set properly. So this is how, as I'm reading data in, I make sure that it is properly formatted, that it's been read in properly, and that it is in fact the right format. So moving on, at this point, we read in our CSV file. And if we were doing this for the first time, we would need to click here and upload it the way that I attempted to do the raw file that I could not find. Okay, so let's now move on to displaying the location of all captures. So assuming that we've done all this, we've read in our CSV file and we're able to get a sample from it, then let's say that we want to map it. So first in Folium, we would just need to declare map. And in this case, we're setting the center of the map to be right in the middle of where we're going and setting the zoom level to 17. That brings us right into the center of where we did this flight. And then we're going to go for I in range, and then just the length of WD. So this is how many rows there are. So we're basically setting a range and saying, hey, I want you to run this for as many rows as there are. It then takes the latitude, it takes the longitude, and then it creates a marker for each one. And on that marker, it will put the SSID, or the name of the network, as the pop-up when you click on it. So we're basically saying drop a pin at all of these locations, and then when you do that, make the pin pop up this little like bubble that says the wireless network name. So we can also set an icon here. In this case, I just picked a cloud. Why not? But this allows us to have a little bit more control over what the map looks like. And then we need to do .add to, and then in this case, I'm calling it the Intel map, whatever. So finally, we can just type Intel map, and this will make the map create itself. In this case, I'm going to do it over again. And this will take a little bit because we have over 5,000 results.
That's a lot.
And so this loop basically needs to iterate 5,000 times and add 5,000 markers to the map. But we'll see there's a couple issues here. First, well, let's go ahead and let it load, and then we'll go to the issues. But you might notice that I've done very little filtering. So like I basically just dumped all the data in here after cleaning it up, and I haven't actually filtered it in any way, shape, or form. So as I scroll down, we can see, okay, we do have data from all, like, you know, roughly the flight that we did, but we have a lot of data that's all clustered here. And we can also see that there's only a single network here. And I'm pretty sure that we were capturing more than a single network in this area. Even if I zoom in, let's see, can I zoom in? Yeah, there we go. Even if I zoom in, you know, I can't, it doesn't expand into any more networks. So like, I can't really like do a very good search here because only like, I don't know, like 50 to 100 networks are displayed, and most of them are all clustered right around the launch site. So what does that mean? It means that this was basically recording like a whole bunch when we were launching, and we need to do something to start cleaning up this data. Or, I mean, we can cut straight to the point and start just looking for our target devices. So in this case, let's just look for our target devices. Rather than trying to plot everything right now, let's see if we can do a simple detection by using just this filter. So right now we're gonna basically do the same loop that we did before. We're gonna create a map, and we're also in this case going to be adding if the SSID equals Bingus Mobile or target 3, our other target, then we want to mark it with in this case, a glyph warning sign. So this should be a different icon. It should be a little bit more dangerous, and this should also go faster. There we go, because we're actually only plotting 3 things. Yeah. Everything else is going to pass because it'll fail this filter right here. So, okay, so we found 3 different contacts that registered as either Bingus Mobile or target 3. Yep. So if we remember on our flight path, we had Alex running from over at the launch site over here. So our first detection was of Alex as the drone was like coming up and starting to fly around here. Yep. Our second one was right on the money. So we can basically see as we were flying over, right before we got to the bridge, which probably blocked our signal a little bit once we crossed over it. Right. This was when we had our detection of Alex. And then over here, as we proceeded on our flight path and turned around, right exactly where we saw our second target is where we have it registered. So it looks like a success here. Yeah. But we can go ahead and also modify this data a little bit more to give us more insight into what's going on. So one thing we can do is using the data we got from the video, we can write a time filter. So because we have time codes, Pandas makes it really easy for us to compare time values and decide if one is greater than the other or less than the other, and use that to write a filter, in this case to omit all these ugly data points and clusters that are all kind of focused around the launch point. See this? We don't want this. This is wasting a lot of resources because, as I said, this is not mapping all the data points. This is kind of clustering them and only representing them with like maybe like the last one on that location or something. But either way, it's not actually showing us all of our data. So if we go ahead and run this filter instead, what this is doing is it's saying if it was first seen between these 2 times, then we want to include it. And that means if the first time this network was seen wasn't when the drone was up and flying, we want to remove it from the map. And otherwise, we're going to go ahead and map it again. In this case, I think I used the cloud icon. So here we can see we still have a little bit of a cluster, but not nearly as bad as it was before. So this is actually, while it doesn't look too different, this has actually filtered out all the extra stuff that was over here and made our data a little bit more representative of our flight. So this is basically only data that was received during the drone's actual flight and the video recording, which is very useful for us to have. So finally, it's driving me crazy that we can't actually see all the data points here. And Alex and I worked on this a little bit, and the best solution I was able to find was actually going ahead and creating a cluster map. Now, a cluster map will go through and attempt to represent every single data point by allowing you to click on an individual location and expand it into other data points that have been mapped there. Now, we still have the problem of relatively low GPS resolution here, where they're kind of clustered into areas where there's still a lot kind of represented over a single point. But let's go ahead and run this code. And what this should do is both identify our targets. So I actually combined both parts of code, and also I cluster all kind of networks together. So because we're running both of these at the same time, the code might take a little bit to go because we're mapping everything, but here we go. This is my favorite map that I've done. So very clearly in red, we have our target contacts, and we can see those right here. Yep. But if we want to see more, we can zoom in and we can see these diverge. So they'll provide more data, and I can see, oh, there were 17 different networks detected here, and I can click on it and see the name. So again, this is not that much code. And I can, for this one has 163, I can expand.
That one's red. That's scary.
I know, right? Watch how these expand.
Dang.
There's a crowd. There's a crowd all over here. So, this kind of representation is much better because we're getting more networks here, and we're able to see like exactly what the drone was able to see as we were flying around. So this is, again, a better representation because it means that we're not guessing as much, and we're able to see that, in fact, there were 57 networks detected at this point. Whoa!
What the heck? How many are those?
That was 700 were detected in this area. And I think it's because like this was...
the launch point?
Well, no, this was... oh, well, actually, yes. Yeah, this was the launch point. So did I filter in this point? Let's see. No, I didn't. So because I didn't filter out in this area, the time, it recorded a huge amount of networks. 2,811 were recorded here. I'm so afraid. Whoa. Look at this solid mass.
It's just like a meatball.
Yeah, it's just like a meatball. But this is why the code's really versatile and cool. So if I want to add this line, I can take this like time-based line. I'm going to scroll down here. And this might fail, but oh wait, we haven't even got to the heat map yet. So let's say that we want to do the marker cluster for Okay, so we're gonna add this, and then I think, will that work? Did it auto index?
Do you need an if statement?
Oh wait. Yeah, I sure do.
And then you would need a colon at the end of that line too, probably.
You are correct. I was like so focused on the indentation, I didn't even like read my code. All right, let's see if that works. So if this works, then what we should be doing is removing anything that is outside the flight time of the drone. So if we look now, hey, look at that. Instead of 2,000, we only have 400. So this is much more in line with the other detections where we have a maximum of 221, 158. So we've managed to take this like from like oh yeah, see, it breaks down even further. So now our maximum is 153. So we've basically fixed the problem with having too much data in this part just by adding a single line of code. So you can see why I love Google Colab and why this is so much fun to use Wardriving data to kind of like figure the stuff out, because it's really easy to represent this in a graphical fashion. So in the last little example I'm going to do, we can also do a heat map. So we can import, in this case from Folium, we import plugins, which allows us to use the heat map plugin. We're going to start at the exact same position, and then we mark each different position as a point. Once we're all the way through there, we can convert it to a 2D array. And I tried to use this using the original example, and it didn't work, so I had to use 2 NumPy instead. And then I also had to change from add children to add child, because I guess this code had been updated. But once it was done, I was able to produce this heat map of the different networks that we were able to detect. Now, the reason I don't like this is, again, the resolution is relatively low. So these are kind of clustered together. And having looked at the GPS data, I'm pretty sure that we have detections like as we fly through these areas. So I'm not totally sure why it clustered it still so much. But we can see by zooming in that, hey, we can see heat maps of where more devices were detected. They start to overlap in certain areas. So especially if you have data that is a bit more spread out. The heat map option is a really good way of visualizing these sorts of interactions. But again, I will say in this case, I wasn't super impressed by the heat map just because it's not quite dense enough and it's not mapping every single point. So we have the same problem with like the cluster. So, you know, there are some limitations to this, but frankly, I'm pretty impressed that we were able to identify our 2 targets almost immediately using this code and using this kind of low budget, we'll call it, setup.
Yeah.
All right, so that's it for our first introduction to warflying and processing Wardriving data with Google Colab / Jupyter Notebook. We went through a lot of different information, but basically if you want to get started with this, you really only need about $30 worth of equipment, a little bit of Arduino flashing experience. You don't really need programming. And after that, you can just interpret the data in Python and have a lot of really rich data for you to analyze, play around with mapping, and learning about. Now again, we were looking for an access point today, but this process could be changed to use Bluetooth, or it could be changed to look for any type of wireless device, including smartphones and other things that are just broadcasting, looking around for wireless networks and aren't broadcasting their own access point. So while we were making this very just kind of clear and easy fox hunting example today, going after an access point, this could easily be modified to be going after, you know, again, like a pair of headphones that had like a Bluetooth interface if we were going to change this over to like an ESP32 based design, or you know, just a smartphone that's probing around for nearby Wi-Fi networks. So I will point out that a phone that was using MAC address randomization would be a little bit harder to track, but there's also the possibility of just broadcasting fake networks that one of those devices might have joined in the past, and then recording anytime one of those smartphones attempted to join that network. So as it flew over, it could just offer up a bunch of like, you know, coffee shop network names or something like that, and that would cause most phones, if they joined that network before, to give up their real MAC address and allow themselves to be tracked a little bit better. So just an interesting spin you could take on that to make it able to track smartphones more specifically and get around MAC address randomization for anybody who might be thinking, oh, well, this might not be useful because of that. So all in all, a very fun project.
Yeah. Maybe in future videos and demonstrations, we'll refactor some of the code we demonstrated today to make this a little more streamlined and better put together. And as Cody mentioned earlier, we're probably also going to be putting out a kit for this. So if you want an easy way to get started without having to throw together a very janky rig like this to tape to the bottom of your drone, we'll definitely have something that'll be more put together in an easy beginner's kit sort of thing.
Yeah, you probably will not need to slice open a USB cable
Right.
and then you use your teeth to strip the wires in our final version.
But
if you want that,
we'll include a USB cable and wire strippers for you.
Exactly. So you can play it on hard mode if you really want to.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, that's all we have for today. I think if you want to learn more about this, you can, of course, stay tuned for some of our future streams. But also, I think Alex is going to be doing some videos on this on Hack5. Am I right?
Yeah,
Cool.
for sure.
So check out Alex on Hack5 as well. If you have ideas for upcoming streams, or if you want to know more about this project, or if you have any questions for our Q&A session, make sure to go to the Security Forward, that's Security FWD channel, and leave your comment there. Make sure to subscribe and sign up for notifications so you know when we go live, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye.